My parents laughed in my face when I asked for help with college, then admitted they'd been using my rent payments to fund my brother's tuition instead. When I finally asked why I was always treated differently, my dad shrugged and said, "We just liked Dylan more. You didn't need us." I didn't say a word. That was 2 months ago. This morning, he watched Dylan pack his bags without offering to help. My folks have always shown clear favoritism toward my little brother Dylan and never tried to hide which son they actually gave a damn about. I had to bust my butt at a grocery store to save up for my hit-up Honda, while Dylan got handed a brand new Mazda for his 14th birthday just because. Same story with everything else, like gaming consoles and smartphones and designer clothes where I got hand-me-downs or nothing. They always told me to man up and stop whining and be the supportive big brother who celebrates his siblings' wins. Now I'm 18, taking a year off before starting at the local community college, so I can work full-time at a warehouse. My parents straight up laughed in my face when I asked if they could chip in for my tuition expenses. But then last week I overheard them in the kitchen discussing how they plan to cover every penny of Dylan's university costs when his time came. I pulled out my phone and hit record while hiding behind the wall, then walked in asking why Dylan gets his education paid for, but I don't. They had no clue I was filming when they said Dylan just needs more support than I do. I pressed them, asking how that made any sense when neither of us had scholarships or anything special going on. Then I kept pushing with more questions about why this double standard had always existed in our house. They got mad, and my old man said maybe it was time for me to find my own place since they were tired of providing shelter for an ungrateful kid. I reminded him that I fork over more than half the mortgage payment every month, but they brushed that off. I stormed out and in my anger posted the whole recording on TikTok and Facebook with a long rant about how this treatment had been my whole life. Within hours, my parents were banging on my bedroom door with my dad screaming about how I'd humiliated them online for everyone to see. We had another blowout fight before they stomped away, furious. My grandma called me that evening saying she was disgusted by what she saw, then showed up the next morning with basically the entire extended family. They forced my parents to sit on the living room sofa like scolded children, while relatives took turns telling them off. That's when I learned my grandparents had been sending them cash every month for years to help with household bills. Dylan stood there looking lost and confused before eventually taking the family's side and admitting he'd noticed the unfair treatment too. My parents gave me this obviously fake apology through gritted teeth. My grandparents offered to let me move in with them immediately and said they'd stop all financial support to my parents. My dad told me I should have kept family business private and hasn't spoken to me since, while my mom has been bawling non-stop. Now I'm second-guessing whether I took things too far by going public. Update. I called my grandparents yesterday and told them I'd take them up on their offer to move in with them. While we talked, I asked about those monthly payments they'd been making to my parents all these years. Apparently my mom had quit her office job to stay home full-time, and they started struggling financially. My grandparents stepped in, sending money each month to help with the mortgage plus extra that was supposed to go into college savings accounts for both Dylan and me equally. But my parents only ever planned to use those funds for Dylan's education, which is also how they bought him that car. So my grandparents are cutting them off completely now, which means my mom will probably have to go back to work to help dad make ends meet. I confronted my parents, demanding to know why Dylan was always the golden child, and asked if there was some big secret I should know about. The answer was absolutely nothing at all, not a damn thing. I'm not the product of an affair, or even an accident baby, they just plain liked Dylan better. I was furious, and we screamed at each other until I couldn't take it anymore, and left. My grandparents pulled up Saturday morning with a U-Haul truck ready to help me move. My parents were shocked when we started carrying boxes inside to pack up my stuff. Dad tried blocking our path, so I reminded him how he told me to get out, and that's exactly what I was doing. Mom started crying again, saying Dad only said that because he was mad, and they were actually counting on my rent payments for Dylan's college fund. I asked if that meant Dylan would never have to pay rent when he turned 18 like I did. Dad admitted that since I was working instead of going straight to college, my money should help pay for my brother's education. Basically, they never expected Dylan to work a single day while in school. My grandpa lost it and tore into my father, saying he'd raised him better than this garbage. He said he'd never been more ashamed, and they wouldn't see another dime from him ever again. Then he warned them he'd cut them out of the family completely if they tried any revenge against me for exposing their lies. Dad backed down immediately, and neither parent said another word to me after that. Dylan and I had this awkward goodbye moment where we didn't really know what to say to each other. Then I just loaded up my car and waved as I drove away to start fresh. But right as I was settling into my new room at my grandparents' place, Dylan texted me a screenshot of our parents' joint bank account showing they'd been hiding a secret trust fund worth over $200,000 that was supposed to be split between us. I stared at that screenshot for what felt like hours, my hands shaking as I zoomed in to make sure I was reading those numbers right. $200,000 sitting in an account with both our names on it, and they'd never said a word. I immediately called Dylan back, and he picked up on the first ring. He explained how he'd been snooping through Dad's home office looking for his car insurance papers when he stumbled across bank statements stuffed in the back of a filing cabinet. The account had been opened when I was born, with regular deposits from various family members over the years for birthdays, holidays, and special occasions. The most recent statement showed it had been sitting untouched for at least 5 years. I hung up and marched straight to my grandparents, who were watching TV in their living room. When I showed them the screenshot, my grandma's face went white. She grabbed the remote and muted the television, then called my grandpa over from the kitchen. They exchanged this long look before my grandpa finally spoke up. Turns out they'd been contributing to that account since day one, thinking it would give both Dylan and me a solid start in life. Other relatives had pitched in too, believing the money would be split fairly when we each turned 18. My grandparents had specifically instructed my parents to use it for our education or to help us buy our first homes. My grandma got up and disappeared into their bedroom, returning with a thick folder full of receipts and bank records. She'd kept track of every single deposit they'd made over the years, and the numbers were staggering. Between them and other family members, they'd contributed over half of what was in that account. I asked why they never mentioned it before, and my grandpa admitted they'd assumed my parents had already given me my share when I turned 18. They thought maybe I'd blown through it or made bad investments, which is why they never brought it up. Finding out the truth made them angrier than I'd ever seen them. My grandma immediately started making phone calls to other relatives who'd contributed, putting them on speaker so I could hear their reactions. My great aunt screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. My uncle threatened to drive over and handle things himself. Every single person felt betrayed and demanded answers. While my grandma worked through her contact list, my grandpa pulled me aside and asked if I wanted to pursue legal action. He said what my parents did was theft, plain and simple, and we had enough evidence to take them to court. But I hesitated, thinking about how that would affect Dylan and tear our family apart even more. Instead, I decided to give my parents one chance to make things right. I texted them saying I knew about the trust fund, and they had 24 hours to transfer my half, or I'd let every family member know exactly what they'd done. Then I turned off my phone and tried to get some sleep, though I mostly just stared at the ceiling. The next morning, I woke up to 57 missed calls and twice as many texts. Most were from my parents, but Dylan had been trying to reach me too. When I finally called him back, he said our parents had been up all night fighting about what to do. Mom wanted to transfer the money immediately, but Dad kept insisting they needed it for Dylan's education. Dylan surprised me by saying he didn't want money that was stolen from me. He'd already told our parents he'd rather take out student loans than use funds that should have been mine. That hit me hard because despite everything, Dylan was still my little brother, and hearing him stand up for me meant more than I expected. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a notification from my banking app. I held my breath as I opened it, then nearly dropped my phone when I saw the deposit. $100,000, exactly half of the trust fund, sitting in my account. A text from my mom followed immediately, begging me not to tell the rest of the family, but I'd already made up my mind. I screenshot the deposit and sent it to our family group chat, along with a message explaining everything. I made it clear that while they'd finally given me my share, it only happened because they got caught. The responses came flooding in within minutes, and none of them were pretty. My grandparents decided to host an emergency family meeting that evening. They specifically uninvited my parents, but made sure Dylan could come if he wanted. He showed up looking exhausted, and we sat together on the couch while relatives filled my grandparents' living room. The meeting was intense. Family members shared story after story about money they'd given my parents over the years, thinking it was for both kids. My great-uncle revealed he'd paid for what he thought were family vacations, only to learn I'd been left with neighbors while my parents took Dylan to Disney World. My aunt mentioned birthday checks that never made it to me. Dylan looked sick as he heard all this. He turned to me at one point and whispered that he had no idea, and I believed him. He was just a kid who got showered with gifts and attention. How was he supposed to know it came at my expense? My grandpa stood up and made an announcement that shocked everyone. He said he'd already contacted his lawyer about removing my parents from his will entirely. Everything would now be split between Dylan and me, skipping our parents completely. Other relatives started nodding and saying they'd do the same. After the meeting, Dylan asked if we could talk privately. We went out to my grandparents' back porch, and he broke down crying. He apologized over and over, saying he wished he'd noticed sooner and done something about it. I told him it wasn't his fault, and I meant it. He then dropped another bombshell. He said he'd been going through more of our parents' files and found emails between them discussing their plan. Apparently, they'd decided years ago that I was too independent and would be fine on my own, while Dylan needed more support. They'd convinced themselves they were doing the right thing by investing everything in him. I asked Dylan what he planned to do now, and he said he wasn't sure. He didn't want to live with our parents anymore, but wasn't 18 yet. My grandparents must have been listening because they came outside and offered to let him move in too. They had plenty of room and would make sure he finished high school properly. The next few days were a whirlwind. Dylan moved his stuff in while our parents watched from the doorway, not saying a word. Dad looked defeated while Mom just cried. Neither of them tried to stop him or apologize again. They knew they'd lost both their sons and their entire extended family's support. My grandparents helped me figure out what to do with the money. We opened investment accounts and met with financial advisors to make sure I'd be set for college and beyond. It felt surreal having that kind of security after years of scraping by. Dylan and I started building a real relationship.
If you want to hear part 2, please subscribe, share, like, follow up for more content like this.